This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you with Bayer Crop Science.
If we look at it in the immediate time span of May, June, then I do not see a significant price reset. I think what we're seeing is the price flatlining a little bit. I think at the end of the day, farmers have to look at their own appetite in terms of the risk, but I would advise that a little and often approach to buying is taken on nitrogen to spread that risk.
As fertiliser prices soar and new season supplies tighten, just when is the right time to buy? A 25-year farm business tenancy as the Duchy of Cornwall takes a long-term approach to regenerative agriculture. TikTok cows and turbocharged bird counts as ecologists use artificial intelligence on farm. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
All that and more coming up, but first, farmers are being urged to manage risk and keep an open mind when ordering fertiliser over the coming weeks. It follows a spike in prices due to the Iran war and a tightening of supplies ahead of the new season market opening in June. Here's Michael Pater, Managing Director of fertiliser suppliers Origin Soil Nutrition.
You know, as we look forward to the new season pricing that would normally start in June, then you have to look at the different elements. So we're talking nitrogen, phosphates and potash, and where do those risks lie? I think we've all seen and read in the papers that at the moment, the high risk area is in nitrogen. The UK is predominantly an ammonium nitrate or a nitrate market, as is Europe. But we are seeing that price being driven by world events and principally from urea coming through the Straits of Hormuz or lack of, which is affecting around 20% of that global trade. So nitrogen is probably the highest risk input as we look at the situation going forward. If you look at phosphates, then phosphates are principally coming out of North Africa. You've got two main types, your TSP. TSP is dependent on sulfur, again, affected heavily by the lack of sulfur coming out of those petroleum regions in terms of the Gulf and again coming out of the Straits of Hormuz. And we're seeing sulfur prices now going to historical levels and up to sort of $950,000 type pricing. It is also extremely tight. You have export bans coming in from China. You have export bans coming in from Russia, whilst they keep those products for their own domestic markets and domestic use. DAP is reliant also on ammonia, and ammonia is still trading at historical highs. So if you're looking at phosphates, we're talking about DAP, maize, oilseed rape starter fertilizers, probably wanting to be on farm around July. Then my advice would be not to wait, because you have a serious risk in terms of supply and demand. OCP, the world's largest producer of phosphates, around 12 million tons, are not in the market. There are no offers. You cannot buy DAP today from them. We also have sanctions on Russian product. We cannot obtain products from alternate sources. So the risk factor is high. Supply and demand is also a risky factor. So I would not sit off that. Potash is slightly different. Generally, the global supply of potash is relatively stable and prices have remained relatively stable. But obviously, they have energy costs in terms of mining, producing, shipping, and those costs are now coming through on a more sort of manageable increments. But you will continue to see potash prices rise over the coming months.
And in terms of arable growers looking to purchase when the new season prices become available, will there be a price reset this time round, Mike?
If we look at it in the immediate time span of May, June, then I do not see a significant price reset. I think what we're seeing is the price flatlining a little bit. Obviously, we're looking at those energy costs, principally around ammonia, and ammonia is tight in supply. So I don't see that we're going to see a reset price. I think at the end of the day, farmers have to look at their own appetite in terms of the risk. There are some that will sit off and see what happens. But I would advise that a little and often approach to buying is taken on nitrogen to spread that risk. So do not leave everything till the last minute. Don't forget, as we start to approach Q3, Q4, certainly getting into Q4 of this year, we will have the added inflationary effect of CBAM coming in, which will be an HMRC-driven revenue applied to us as the importer of fertiliser that will be passed on in the price of the fertiliser to farm.
CBAM, of course, being the carbon border adjustment mechanism, effectively a tax on fertiliser coming into the country, Mike. And in terms of supplies tightening, I guess the advice remains to keep an open mind.
I think being open-minded to the sources of different products, yes, it is. I mean, farms will, and traditionally, look at a certain product and a product of choice, whether that be, granular ammonium nitrate or a prilled AN. I think farms really should be looking at what the cost per unit of N is to them and look to see how they can try and manage that cost within their own business. And that could mean looking at other products. So there is CAN available, there are CAN sulfur grades, there's a urea, etc. So there is a basket of products. And I think farms need to look at how that can be best managed and what are the best costs in terms of those nutritional inputs.
That's Mike Pater from Origin Soil Nutrition. Hugh, Louise, we had Mike on the podcast just a few weeks ago when we were at Great Yarmouth looking at product coming into Origin and the impact of the Iran conflict. Obviously, that conflict ongoing, a hugely, hugely uncertain situation, and that now impacting on new season fertiliser prices and availability too.
Yeah. It'd be really good to know, wouldn't it, how much of the fertiliser product raw material, whether that's in the form of liquid ammonia or in the form of urea prill or indeed ammonium nitrate prill, how much of what we consume in the world comes up the Straits of Hormuz to get to us wherever we happen to be in the world. Because there's a piece in the paper this week which is talking about because we always obviously link fertiliser to gas price because you use the natural gas. You blast steam across it to get the hydrogen. It's the cheapest way to get hydrogen, which you need to make ammonia. All right. So that's why gas is really important with fertiliser. In the papers this week, it's talking about basically the gas price, the wholesale gas market now, whilst all the drama is going on in Iran and the LNG exports out of those Gulf states are basically ground to a halt. That's liquefied natural gas. The market's lower than it's ever been. It's below £40 per megawatt. That's lower than early last year. It is 8 times lower than after the invasion of Ukraine. So I suppose the big question on fertiliser is, how much of what we use in the form of ammonia, prills, whatever, comes up the Straits of Hormuz? Because in the case of the gas market, what's happened is that other places, producers, not marginally, obviously the biggest one's America, the US, has backfilled where that demand is. There's still some uncertainty around crude oil on that side and the speed that those tankers move, and that we could be heading to a bit of a harsh middle of May in terms of when tankers should have arrived at European refineries and haven't. But the question around gas is, it's an interesting thing that's happening at the moment, not as people predicted would happen.
And as new season prices become available, Louise, arable growers especially who order in June will be looking at this situation very, very closely.
Yeah, they will be looking at it. And I mean, timing the fertiliser market this year is at the moment looking extremely difficult. What do you do? And of course, there are other issues as well around this, because of course, if you are going to order some or all of your fertiliser early, there are a couple of things. You've got to have the cash flow to be able to do that, and you've got to have the storage to take it. But of course, at the moment, we don't actually know whether there will be any fertiliser or much fertiliser anyway, because everything has ground to a halt. I mean, we had that conversation last week on the podcast, didn't we, with Charlie Ireland, and he was saying, you're going to have to link some of these decisions to your crop margins and on what you know that you're capable of doing. So I guess for most people, there's going to be a sort of phased purchasing strategy, if it's possible to do that, and to get some coverage in. And I think, Hugh, you used the term last week, uncharted territory, and it really is uncharted territory. What is interesting, though, I think if you look back, I think it's over the last 20 years, if you ordered your fertiliser early, in 15 of those years, that would have been absolutely the right thing to do. So the nitrogen price went up significantly after that early order period. The other 5 years, it was sort of half of it, didn't really move much, and the other half, it actually went the other way. So that sort of strategy has served growers very well in the past. Is it going to this year? I really have no idea at all.
Hugh, it's somewhat early days, and I know you're mainly maize and grass rather than arable, but what's your situation? Are you ordering any yet?
Not for next year. Probably bought a bit more than I needed to this time round when it finally arrived. The worrying, I don't know, it is worrying when you look at the global on-farm scenario, and when you look at the media coming out of America, there's some serious problems there with there's serious worry there about fertiliser supply, and their prices have really jumped. Australia as well. We talked about it last week, didn't we? That Australian growers, obviously it's their autumn now, thinking about planting, and they're saying, should we plant? Because we can't guarantee on those fertiliser supplies. So there is, it's a tricky one. There's a lot of disruption. I mean, what that tells you is there is a huge amount of disruption in that supply chain, or a lot of very clever market sort of talking up by a lot of shifty traders of fertiliser. But I'm sure it's the former, not the latter.
And there's one other thing, Hugh, I think that we also need to just mention, and that is that, of course, we've got a carbon tax coming in at the start of next year. So that's going to add something to the price of fertiliser. So maybe another reason to buy it a bit early.
Well, it could be, but you could say that the carbon tax is, in the words of Donald Rumsfeld, is a known. So it's a known. So make it a not known. I.e., the government has the power, and I know it's an EU thing as well. They have the power to actually say, well, we could just shelve that for a bit to take a bit of pain out of the marketplace and take a bit of inflation out of the supply chain, and ultimately the food price. So that's a controllable. What isn't controllable is what the heck's happening, in the Middle East, which has upset this thing.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And now a special welcome to this week's podcast partner, Rachel Banks from Bayer Crop Science. Rachel, welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk about what's happening in the field this spring. Cereal crops looking good. We had a solid start last autumn, but all this mild, wet weather we've been getting, the perfect storm for diseases like septoria, mildew and eye spot. But you've got a new Bayer Crop Science product to help us out.
Yeah, that's right. So Vivalis is our new early season T1 fungicide. It's designed to handle this exact kind of heightened disease stress. It's a mix of the newer SHI active called Iblon and the established azole prothioconazole. And as well, it's approved for use on wheat, barley, oats, and we've got some other cereals on there as well.
So it works against these foliar diseases like septoria, powdery mildew, all those nasty stem diseases we see too much of.
Yeah, exactly. But its real strength here is how it tackles rusts, including actually the YR15 strain that has been in quite a big concern for winter wheat growers this season.
So if we get into the science a little bit then, there's a really interesting component to the molecule structure that supports its efficacy.
Yeah, so the Iblon component of Vivalis has this unique molecular feature at its core. It's called a nitrogen cyclopropyl ring. It's kind of like a turbocharger. So it boosts the fungicide's own power, often referred to as its intrinsic ability, which means that you get really reliable performance against a broad spectrum of diseases, even when the weather and other conditions are really quite changeable.
And you've some more good news too.
Yeah, so thanks to a lot of work at a regulatory level, you can now use all Iblon formulations, including Vivalis, across the same field season after season. So Vivalis is a really robust tool using some quite smart molecular tech in it to keep out those tough rust strains. I'd consider it for your crop protection plans and definitely speak to your agronomist.
Rachel Banks from Bayer Crop Science, thank you for joining us.
Use plant protection products safely by reading the label and following all the safety precautions. For more information, visit our website cropscience.bayer.co.uk or speak to your local contact. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, tenant farmers have long called for longer tenancies, arguing that farm business tenancies of 3 to 5 years are just too short to justify long-term investment. Well, someone appears to be listening, in royal circles at least. The Duchy of Cornwall, owned by Prince William, has just launched a regenerative farm business tenancy lasting 25 years. Monkhall Farm encompasses some 365 hectares of mainly Grade 2 land in Callow, Herefordshire. Well, earlier, Louise and I caught up with Matthew Morris, the Duchy's rural director, and I started by asking Matthew, what's this new regenerative FBT all about?
Well, we think that regenerative farming is a solid part of the future of British agriculture. We think it's important from a climate resilience perspective. It's becoming increasingly important from a farm profitability perspective as well. But most importantly, from the Duchy's perspective, we have an ambition to be a nature-rich and net zero estate. And regenerative farming really helps us tick both those boxes. So we're looking to work with our farmers to basically create a transition right across the estate. But we've got an amazing opportunity at Monkhall to really sort of almost start with a bang with that process.
FBTs offer flexibility in uncertain times, I suppose. They have been criticised for their sort of role in encouraging short-term thinking. Being able to plan for a 25-year period is a breakthrough, I think, really. How did you arrive at that length of time?
Well, the Duchy of Cornwall has always been a long-term landlord. So when we look at our average length of tenancy, I think the statistic is, I think we're something like 14 or 15 years. So we've never shied away from long-termism in our farm lettings. I've always believed that that's really important from a investment perspective. So many things in farming will have a lifespan that requires you to get your money back over a certain period of years. Very rarely is that less than 5 years. So we're committed to long-termism, and the 25-year term really, we talk about this tenancy offer at Monkhall being a generational opportunity. I think particularly when we're talking about regenerative farming, taking a long-term view is important. The transition period is about 6 years from entry through to coming out the other side with a really profitable business. And we want people to be able to build a business and take that long-term view. I think there have been too many short-term decisions, and I prefer to focus on the long term.
Is this the start of something then, as far as the Duchy is concerned? Will regenerative FBTs become more common? Would they perhaps be the default option for all new tenancies going forward?
Yes, moving forwards, we've got an ambition that this does become our default position. We have to recognise that our contexts within the Duchy are very different. We've got lowland farms, we've got farms in the uplands, and we've also got farms on the Isles of Scilly as well. So our FBT that we're developing will effectively have 3 versions of it that recognise those different contexts, because as part of the regenerative process, recognising the context is at the heart of it, and it has to work in all of those settings. In terms of how we plan to roll this out, it will take time. I mean, it will happen at change points in tenancies, whether that's a succession or the end of a tenancy, and it's a new letting. And in the case of Monkhall, we've got a brand new letting that we're looking at. So we're using that opportunity to go ahead and launch.
We wish you all the best for that launch, Matthew. I understand that will be at Groundswell this year. Before we do go, though, the Duchy has come under some criticism recently following your decision to sell the Bradnich estate in Devon. What's the latest on that?
So we've been in the press recently around the sale of the Bradnich estate in Devon. From our perspective, this is just part of our business. The Duchy regularly sort of buys and sells parts of its portfolio. We're a long-term estate. We're currently in the process of doing some portfolio rebalancing so that our land and our assets deliver the greatest possible social and environmental impact. At Bradnich, I'm pleased to say that we've been talking to all of our tenants, all of our farm tenants, and they are all currently exploring the opportunity of purchasing their farm, which is great news. So we're working really closely with our farmers, we're having regular meetings with them, and we're going on the journey with them. So far, that's felt like very positive conversations on the ground.
That's Matthew Morris from the Duchy of Cornwall and a new regenerative farm business tenancy, a long length tenancy, Louise, a forward-looking tenancy.
Yeah, well, it's their new system, isn't it? And not only is it a regenerative farm business tenancy, but it's also over a period of 25 years. That's a really good thing, isn't it? Then you're going to have the confidence to plan and invest in the business, or the incoming tenancies anyway, knowing that they're going to be there for 25 years. So it's a tenancy for a generation, really, isn't it?
And Hugh, a tenancy like this, a regenerative farm business tenancy, appealing for you?
Yeah, look, I think it's appealing for me. If a farmer has got a landlord, a tenant has got a landlord that is willing to back them for 25 years, I think that's a phenomenal thing, isn't it? And if there's a relationship there, and if it's if there's a multi-generational relationship already established, and that landlord can then transpose that into a 25-year or longer tenancy and support them with the sort of stuff that these guys are, as landlords, are going to support them with, whether that's monitoring, advice, infrastructure help or whatever, then it's absolutely great. I suppose the reality is, though, whilst it's, something that these big, if you will, institutional type landlords who've got plenty of assets elsewhere to make the money can invest in, the reality is for many landlords who aren't duchy estates and other type things, they're going to struggle to do this. And they may not be in such a position. So it's phenomenal for those with the opportunity to be tenants on these estates. The reality is it's more challenging, isn't it, in real world economics and in real world situations where you might be a landlord of 1,000 acres of farmland and that's all you own. You may love the tenant that you have, but would you put all the resourcing in? But it leads the way, doesn't it? And there'll be ideas that spring from that smaller landlords can adopt, which will help to hopefully make life easier for those tenants long term if they're in that situation of a long term tenancy.
It does look, Louise, like this will be the first of many, at least as far as the Duchy of Cornwall is concerned. This is not going to be a one-off, and neither is it going to be a flash in the pan. It really is the long-term direction of travel for the Duchy of Cornwall.
Oh, absolutely. It's very much, it's what they have decided that they want to do. Obviously, as a whole unit, they've got their ambitions on nature recovery, net zero, all these things that we know about. And they see this as the future. This is the way things are going. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think he said to us, didn't he? It's as much about farming as it is about the person that comes in. So they are looking for a system that really does look after the land, improve that asset, but also is right for the tenant, and they can have a profitable and sustainable business which rewards them for all their hard work. So fantastic.
And good to see, Hugh, that Prince William, the Prince of Wales, very much following his father in terms of taking an active interest in the future of farming on the royal estates, an ambassador for agriculture.
Yeah, and look, that is good to see. And let's not look, I'm sure the Prince of Wales surrounds himself with plenty of well-versed and knowledgeable people that have advised him down this path. There's no getting away from the fact that he's inherited a great chunk of land and he's got to do something with it. So if he can be a trailblazer and drive that change, then that is a fantastic thing, because they're in a position that they, like I say, they can afford to do that. And if that then filters down into the wider community who don't have such huge estates, and the stuff that they can learn from that and incorporate in how they run their tenancies for their tenants, then that's only got to be a good thing. So it's great that that's happening. And there's some realism there as well, isn't there? Because you could go down the route of saying, no, I want an all organic, or I want a really idealistically driven type estate scenario. And clearly they've not done that. This is there's pros and cons in here, and it's effectively helping general production move in the right way in terms of its environmental impact and its emissions and everything about it, and long-term soil health. So it's got to be a good thing. It's a really good potential proving ground as well, isn't it, for a long-term project where you've got commitment, and let's hope we'll be able to see and monitor it as it develops, and we can all learn from that.
Yeah, and who knows, might even get Prince William himself on the Farmers Weekly podcast and pick his brains on regenerative farming. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
The Farmers Weekly podcast. The Farmers Weekly podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can also message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. Hugh, a lot of news about cows this week.
Well, look, there was a story last week that we missed. Which was it was in the Telegraph. There's a couple of stories out of the Telegraph, actually. One last week, which was a farmer quoted as saying he's going to breed uglier cattle to deter TikTok tourists. Some people may be aware there's this wacky social media craze where everyone wants to be seen hugging a cow. I mean, it's the latest thing because they've obviously run out of ideas in terms of how they photograph themselves, their possessions, their homes, their breakfast, their dinner, their clothes, their shower, their shampoo. They now want to hug your cow. And look at me on TikTok being an absolute anyway. So he's driving this particular farmer mad because he has a herd of Highland cattle, which obviously everyone thinks are super cute. I had a bloke the other day trying to take a picture. He came into my beef yard and I just happened to see him with a 3-year-old. I mean, she must have been 3, a tiny little girl just walking on a tiny bike. And he stood right by the cattle, and these are like 300-400 kilo cattle in a pen, and they're very soppy and friendly. But as I pointed out, I said, look, mate, if the cow rubs against your child's fingers, it'll crush them, which we've had happen before. So these people are just completely unaware of the potential risks, as lovely as it is, cows being centre of attention. And the other story in this week's Telegraph is about the Rare Breed Survival Trust being concerned about white parks. Female white parks are now below. Well, it says that just 950 white parks left across the UK. I'm not sure if that is in total or whether that's breeding females, but it's on the critical list. Although the way it's written, I mean, there's lots of reasons, isn't there? Why white parks aren't the leading breed of cow. As lovely as they are, they're 2,000 odd years old. Genetically, they are not as efficient as lots of other breeds. Although the author of the article, Patrick Galbraith, says that in recent years, farmers have increasingly sought out alternatives such as Aberdeen Angus and fast-growing European breeds such as Limousins, which I'd question whether Limousins are indeed fast-growing compared to Angus's. But obviously that's been going on for forever, for decades. But sad that the white park is under pressure. I'm not really sure what you do other than keep a little special nucleus herd going or keep the core lot going. The pigs escaped this because you'll remember that many, many years ago, 20 odd years ago, Gloucester old spots became almost extinct. And we got some around sort of 1999, 2000. And there was literally literally almost 100 breeding females left. And obviously they've become the pig of choice for hobby pig keepers. So whether the white park, I don't know, everyone get a white park cow and put it in their back garden. I'm not sure what the answer is really, because as lovely as they are, commercially, they clearly are questionable in terms of how they perform against other breeds. So lots of cow news.
Lots of cow news for you then, Hugh. Louise, what have you been up to? Have you been hugging any cows at all?
No, I haven't been hugging any cows this week, but I have to say that I was quite interested in an article that I saw in the Times this week, which basically said that seeds can hear the rain. And when they do, it helps them to grow better. So apparently, this work was done in America at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that at the sound of rainfall, these seeds become much more attuned to their surroundings. And in fact, they measured that they germinated between 30 to 40% faster. So that just caught my eye this week. And then I was thinking about that because, of course, we haven't really had any rain, or we certainly not down here, we haven't for the last few weeks. And there will be quite a few farmers out there with their spring drilling just completed, hoping that these seeds that they've just put in the ground will be able to hear some rain before too long, and then they'll germinate and get away quickly. So there you go. We'll have to wait to see what else they come up with on that.
Do you think if you had a speaker broadcasting the sound of rainfall across a newly sown field of seeds, they'd go, "Oh, let's get on," even though there isn't actually any rainfall? We could be missing a trick here.
We could try that on your farm here and see what happens.
Yeah, that was interesting. But it is dry. It's very dry, particularly all down the east. Well, everywhere is dry. Down the east side is very dry. I know there's quite a lot of concern there. And presumably, Louise, that's going to have a big impact on disease, because if it suddenly gets a bit wet, where are you to with your sprays and your fungicides?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the moment, of course, the dry weather is meaning that disease is disappearing a bit every day. Yeah, there are some considerations always, aren't there, when it's very dry at this time of year. So, for example, if you're putting nitrogen on, do you hold a bit back in case the plant can't really take it up? Are some of these crops looking a wee bit stressed now? You know, what are you going to do with some of your applications that, say, for example, plant growth regulators? Not a very good idea to put those onto stress crops. So a bit of tinkering, I think, is happening out there at the moment, because there's no rain on the forecast, or certainly not for this part of the country anyway.
Well, that's the mainstream media covered. Farmers Weekly this week, of course, also chock-a-block full with news and views on everything about farming, including, Hugh, goings-on in Wales.
There's a double-page spread talking about the Welsh elections, which, of course, coming up with all the other elections beginning of May, and all the runners and riders there in terms of the policy differentials between the different parties. At the moment, Plaid Cymru, the Nationalists, doing very well in terms of polling. And obviously, at the moment, Labour predicted not to do so well. So that's discussing the impact that's likely to have or could have on ag policy within the Welsh arena for me. I mean, one of the things I picked up on the Plaid, if you look at Plaid's manifesto, they talk about basically moving down a similar path that the existing Welsh government are with the sustainable farming scheme that they're getting underway. But I think the one thing that differentiates them and Reform actually from the existing administration, the Labour administration, is when they talk about wildlife control and TB control, which is something that many Welsh producers and the industry across the board in Wales have really struggled with TB. Whilst they're doing a lot of work to try and combat it without wildlife control, we know that where it's really bad, you do need that push to get it over the line in terms of bringing numbers down dramatically, as we have done on this side of the border. So that's there. The other thing is milk production. Some pretty miserable news for dairy farmers who are already not very happy about the dairy price. That we've got a new production record in the 25-26 milk year, with deliveries hitting an all-time high of 13.02 billion litres. That's up 5% year on year, which obviously does nothing to put any value into the milk price. And at the moment, it's a bit of a struggle, I think, because there's lots of milk everywhere and not so many places for it to go. But yeah, there's lots in the magazine this week. And the other thing is there's a very interesting talking point, actually, on the letters page, which is from one of the lecturers at the Royal Agricultural University at Sarum, who talks about, this gentleman's name is James Riley, he's a research fellow, and he's talking about the lab-grown meat, that lab-grown meat may provide opportunities for farmers. Now, whilst obviously there's a lot of concern around that and the impact that could have on growing livestock, clearly, what he's suggesting is that it's sort of in its infancy in terms of how it's developing. But could it be, he says, that at the very extreme, people may end up with bioreactors in their own home and grow their own protein that way? Or, as he says, it could be a diversification opportunity for farmers to have bioreactors in their sheds. As opposed to having beef cattle in your shed, you grow a load of lab-grown meat, but I have no idea what the CapEx. I'd imagine it would be pretty hefty, the CapEx, because opponents of lab-grown meat would tend to say you still need all the basic raw materials of the protein and the carbohydrate to go in to feed the cells. You could argue it's more efficient because what you grow is what you eat. There's no fifth quarter, there's no hide to get rid of, and no SBOs to get rid of in the case of cows, etc. But then what you spend on capital in terms of labs and bioreactors and everything else, and the impact that has producing it, is that long term, do the sums add up in terms of environmental impact? So, but it's an interesting perspective that he's put across anyway.
Thank you, Hugh. Do the sums add up from an environmental perspective? Do the sums add up from this week's markets? Hugh, what's happening?
Thank you very much, Johann. Finished the deadweight this week, drops back again, 631.3. That's gone back about 4p on the week. The live weight average drops back 10p, 350.5. Sheep prices still pretty fierce, 843. Is the deadweight SQQ this week. So it's only gone back about 3 pence, 3.7p on the week. The live weights dropped back less than, 0.3 of a penny. Sorry, 0.7 of a penny. It's 408.3. It was 409 last week. So still some strong money there. Pig price, I'm afraid, still pretty flat, 181.5. It's actually, for the first time in a long time, it's actually edged up 0.2 of a penny. So could this be the start of a pig revival? I'm sure pig producers will be hoping so, because they've had a pretty damn miserable run at the moment. Not dissimilar to our friends in the happy world of arable farming as well. Although there's a little bit of rise in the market this week, £172.80 feed wheat. That's gone up over £1.50 on the week. And actually, we get very miserable about the current wheat price. In context, a year ago, feed wheat was spotting at 165.60 this time last year. So it's actually, whilst you may not really feel that at all richer, it's actually, £7 or so higher than it was this time last year. Milling wheat has been pretty rubbish. That's jumped up this week, £185.30, up from £174.90 last week. Feed barley drops back 10p a tonne, 153.20. Oilseed rate 452 this week. Some cheer there because that's kicked on, getting on for nearly £10 on, or just over £10 actually, not quite £11, £10.80 or so. It's gone up, so that's good news. Feed peas 208, that's back £2. Feed beans 215.60, that's dropped back just under £1 on the week. Diesel price, it's edging in the right direction, but it's still high, 103.46. Back from 109.93. I know my fuel card price has gone down a good 7 or 8p on the week, which is good news. But I tell you what will make you sick when you think that a year ago you were only paying 63.5 pence per litre.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, artificial intelligence is helping to count thousands of birds on UK farms in a way that could benefit growers and livestock producers. Acoustic monitoring technology recorded nearly 20,000 bird calls in just 1 week on a Dorset farm, showing how different farming practices can benefit wildlife. It's much faster than doing it with the human ear, although arguably not as enjoyable. Joining us now is George Caterer from Wilder Sensing. George, people have been counting birds for years. People really enjoy it, but this is turbocharged bird counting, isn't it?
Yes. What we're trying to do really in introducing AI into the analysis here is unlocking a scale to the technology that hasn't traditionally been achievable. There's nothing particularly novel around using microphones or placing microphones in the field to record audio. The hardware that we use is a simple microphone attached to some AA batteries, really. But the limiting factor has always been that once you place 1, 2, 3 of these in the field for any length of time, you're going to be getting back tens of thousands, sometimes millions of audio files. So the data volume becomes the limiting factor. Obviously, with the introduction of AI, machine learning, what we can do is analyze all of that audio, all of those million files within hours, rather than, what could have taken weeks, months, years, at considerable expense. And suddenly, rather than taking small snapshot pictures of biodiversity, that 1 hour window that an ecologist or an ornithologist can go and monitor a site, suddenly we can introduce a continuous data stream that not only tracks kind of what is or isn't there, but can track change, either seasonal change or change as the land management practices are adapted. And we can get a much more robust, data-driven decision-making process for land managers to inform their work.
Having lots and lots of data is one thing, George, but actually doing something with it is quite another. What are you doing with it, and how is it benefiting farmers?
What an ecologist or an ornithologist or someone with some contextual background can do with that information is understand, based on how often certain species are prone to call or how long their calls are, you can get a kind of a proxy for a population, not in terms of number, but maybe in terms of small, medium, good, or large sizes, and especially in terms of change. If you look at, specific to this example, let's say, you've got 11 calls for a skylark on the conventional field and you've got 4,000 plus on the regen field. Now, that's not the same number of skylark that are just dramatically louder on one field than the other. It's a noticeable difference in activity and population size. So it's more about how you interpret that data than sort of simply looking at it. And the beauty of sort of continuous monitoring like this is we can start asking more interesting questions than sort of purely population size, because that in and of itself isn't necessarily the only statistic that matters when looking at how viable and improved some of these habitats are.
All exciting stuff then, and you talk about what you can do with this data. What are your next steps? Where does it go from here?
So the next steps for us are about broadening out the taxa we can monitor as well. So the same technology can be applied to bats. So we can work with people now to understand kind of how that taxa is doing on their site, which has obviously been historically an important one around UK legislation. Anyone that's done any form of development will be well aware of the need to monitor bats. And we're also moving beyond just using acoustics or sound to start image analysis as well. So we've got a brand new Moth Sense coming out, which is a static solar-powered device that will take images throughout the night, and then all of those images will be uploaded to the same pipeline and auto-ID up to sort of 300 Eumacromar species. So that'll become a really important taxa for farmers, as well as obviously they're an important pollinator species and often highly under-measured species because of the really labour-intensive traditional measures for monitoring invertebrates. So hopefully there we can start bringing some data to the table that has been overlooked purely because of human limitations.
That's George Caterer from Wilder Sensing, using birdsong to measure biodiversity. Hugh, they do say you've got to measure it to manage it.
Yeah, you do have to measure it. Look, this is good. The one thing that, looking at the article, it's very interesting, and I've got, and lots of people I'm sure listening to this have got Merlin on their phone, which is a really good app. Those that you don't have it, look up Merlin bird listening device app on your phone and get it downloaded. And Merlin will, as you walk along, it listens and it picks up the birds. And this is great. And actually, this is not too bad, because when you look at the costings of it, it's sort of a few £100, 500 quid for the box. Then they're charging you 600 odd quid a year for the subscription to the software. And I suppose if it means you can put the box all around the farm and keep moving it and it analyzes remotely, then that's good. I think whatever systems we have, look, these systems are great. They're great. But I love walking around with Merlin. The other thing you can do in Merlin early in the morning when the sun's just coming up is you just put it on the bedroom window. And it's always amazing the different birds it picks up earlier versus later. Now, as opposed to sending a small Victorian boy out to scare the birds, as the Victorians did, you could send a person out with a phone with Merlin to listen to all your different fields and see what's going on. Alternatively, you could use this system, or you could find a smart 3G, 4G mic that will feed back into Merlin remotely from a remote location and give you a reading. But I think whatever we do with these, we have to absolutely, and supply chains are obviously going to embrace this for obvious reasons, because they can prove that their farmers are doing phenomenal things for the environment and they've got this number of birds or this type of bird thing going on. It can't quite tell the numbers yet, can it? We just have to be careful, or the supply chains have to be careful, as they don't get lulled down the avenue of flash kit and software and burden the producer with a whole lot of money they've got to pay for hardware and kit. and software and cloud access when there's perfectly adequate things already in the marketplace for a fraction of the cost. So we've just got to be careful that, we don't get ushered into the wrong corner or the wrong room, which costs us a lot of money. And I think if these things become really cheap and accessible, there's absolutely no reason. You could have it on every farm, couldn't you? And it could be our big pushback as opposed to the great farmland bird count for 1 week in February. It means we can have the great constant stream of birdsong from UK farmland all year round, demonstrating the diversity and what's actually going on out there.
Well, I would hope, Hugh, that the big farmland bird count will continue despite the advent of technology like this. But the sheer amount of data, Louise, that this wilder sensing device can crunch through in a very, very short amount of time, nothing short of staggering, really.
No, that's right. But I think there is actually real human expertise sometimes can beat these systems. So you probably need to use a bit of both. I think the point, and Hugh, you make the point about Merlin and other systems that are out there, but this technology, I know this really is a developing space. So they're not just going to be listening to birds. They're going to be including mammals, all sorts eventually. So it really does give you a way of doing that surveillance that, as we've just said, increasingly the supply chains want to know about. So I think, as I said, early days, and we'll have to see what comes next. We will have to keep an eye on what it's going to cost. But I think it's a very good way of being able to show a lot of the very good stuff that's happening on farms.
Yeah, good to see another tool that will enable us to bang the drum for farming and agriculture and what growers and livestock producers can do in the field to benefit wildlife and hopefully be rewarded for doing so as well. That is it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, as always, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast was brought to you with Bayer Crop Science. As fertiliser prices soar,